Okay, here we are, October the 19th, 2019. I'm updating my carrier strike group for the Chinese. Lots of things have happened, and I thought I ought to get a new one out here. And so what we have is a full-blown Chinese carrier strike group in 350th scale. You see the Liaoning there, which is their first carrier. They have a second carrier that is built off of the same design, pretty much exactly, which is the old design from what was going to be the Varyag from Russia, actually from the USSR in the 1880s. But they went out of business. They bankrupted. Ultimately, China bought the Varyag's hull, which was probably, with the hull and the equipment, a good 60% complete. Took it to China, initially under the auspice of it being an amusement park and casino, but everyone knew what it was going to be, and that is exactly what happened. It ended up in Dalian shipyards. They completely rebuilt it, and this is what they came out with. The beautiful carrier. It is what we call a Stobar Carrier. That means it's a short takeoff but assisted landing. The short takeoff is in the ski jump. The assisted landing is the barrier arrested lines in the back, so they have a hook on the end of the plane to catch those arrestor wires, and so they land just like a US carrier does. They take off, however, up the ski ramp. The problem with that, of course, is you are more limited in the amount of weight you can carry when opposed to a catapult. Now, that's okay. This is what the Chinese could get. They got it. They built it. And then to make good on it, they built another one just like it. And it's out. It's been plowing the seas for well over a year. And they are building a third now. The third is going to be probably conventionally powered, just like these, like this one. But it will be a catobar, which is what we call the kind of carriers the United States and France have, which means they are using catapults and assisted recovery. So the Chinese are about to step into that world. Whether the first one will be nuclear powered or not, we don't know. My guess is not. Whether it will have an electromagnetic launch or not, we don't know. My guess is it could. If it's an all-electric carrier, then they can get the electric turbines to do that job. A lot will depend on what it is. But as you can see, this carrier is a large carrier. It probably displaces on the order of 65 to 70,000 tons. And they are carrying an upgraded version of the Russian aircraft, which was the Su-33. They've called it the J-15. It has much more composite material in it, and therefore it is lighter and more maneuverable. It's all glass. It's all new. It's a better aircraft than what the Russians had. But of important note, it is not fifth generation. It is not stealthy. And right now, that is an issue with the Chinese. The reason it's an issue is because the United States has now got the F-35B and the F-35C out for carrier operations that are fifth generation stealth aircraft. And is expected that they will do very, very well against the J-15 or any airplane like it. And so the Chinese, you can bet, are working on getting a stealth aircraft for their carriers just as fast as they can. However, they do have the carrier. It is a powerful carrier, and not something to be scoffed at or mocked. No American captain or commander of any U.S. carrier or group would ever do that, because these aircraft can carry anti-shipping missiles, and they exercise very regularly, much more regularly than the Russians ever have. And they have been exercising this carrier with its escorts for the last 6 to 7 years, and they're squared away, I've got to tell you. They are doing very well. They have 2 of these carriers now. They soon will have a 3rd carrier and are headed for nuclear. A minute ago I talked about their escorts. That's one of the reasons I wanted to redo this video on the Chinese carrier task force. You notice this ship that I'm looking at right now. This is what's called a Type 055 large destroyer. Actually, in America, we would call it a cruiser. Its displacement is probably on the order of 12,000 or more tons, and it has more vertical longitude than any other Chinese vessel before it. In addition to that, the Chinese have at last, in a large class of vessels, if you look at the back there, there's a helicopter on deck, but you see 2 doors, so they will carry 2 large-sized anti-submarine warfare helicopters. And as I've long said on these videos, that's very important when it comes to hunting submarines, because once you find one, you can rotate your helicopters and not have to leave it behind or shorten your ability to stay there because of fuel. You have two helicopters that can stay with that target until you destroy it. At any rate, this vessel has 112 vertical launch cells. Some people will say, well, the Ticonderoga cruiser the United States has 128. Well, that's true, except it's really 122 because of the loading device they have. Takes up 6 cells. And in addition to that, if you'll look right here, you'll see that the Chinese have a Sino variation of the RAM missile launcher, which would be the rolling airframe missile. Works the same way. They carry 24 missiles as opposed to our 21, and the Ticonderoga does not carry them. So you take 112 and add 24 to it, what do you have? 136. So they have 136 missiles, which is actually more than the 122 that the Ticonderoga carries. However, the Ticonderoga also carries 8 Harpoon type missiles on the rear of the vessel. So then you take the 122 and add 8 to it, and you've got 130. So for all intents and purposes, you've got the same number of ready to fire missiles on both ships. Now, the only other difference is there's one 130 millimeter gun on this ship, and there are 2 127.5 millimeter guns on the Ticonderoga. Now, the Ticonderoga is carrying the AEGIS system, which is a very proven system. The United States is also very open with its testing, and there can be no doubt that the AEGIS system is a very effective system at defending carriers. There just can be no doubt about that. We don't know enough about the Chinese to be able to say that. Now, of course, they're going to say that their system is better than the U.S. system. I personally hold that in some doubt. My dog is barking, as you can hear. We just had some thunder. At any rate, it's important to note that they have 2 of those vessels here in this carrier strike group. In addition, they have 2 Type 52D destroyers, each of which carries 64 missiles. Our AEGIS destroyers, the Arleigh Burke, carry 96. But then once again, you've got to take the 64 and add 24 to it. So you're now up to 88 missiles, and you're approaching the same number of missiles. They have built in the last short time period 17 or 18, approaching 20 of these Type 2 52D destroyers, which were the follow-on to the Type 52C. The Type 55, they have built 4. 2 of them are commissioned, and 4 more are building. So they're going to build them very quickly so they can have them to escort their aircraft carriers that they are also building. So there you have the main escorts, but we're not done yet. Then they have good, decent frigates like the United States used to have at the time with the Oliver Hazard Perry class. This is the Type 054A frigate. It carries 8 missiles for surface to surface, in other words, anti-shipping missiles. It also has 32 vertical launch missiles for shooting either aircraft, or they can also shoot sub-rocks to attack submarines. So, got a good gun, got decent anti-submarine warfare. They've got a helicopter that flies off that machine, off that ship, and they have built on the order of 30 of those, and have all they need for their aircraft carriers and their amphibious assault. If you look on the channel, my channel, you will find amphibious ready group with 2 very nice LPDs on the order of the San Antonio class. So now we have 2 cruiser-sized vessels with as many missiles as the Ticonderoga, 2 decent destroyer missiles. They all have the same type of equipment, and we would be foolish not to think that they don't all communicate together like the AEGIS system does, and I would be willing to bet that these cruiser-sized vessels probably have the capability of controlling, just like our cruisers have, the combat of the other ships. Now, one weak spot for sure, and that's not to say that there aren't others, because we just don't know the capabilities of all these ships, but you can bet that they didn't build them slackardly. They've built ships that are capable, and you would have to be foolish not to take this development very seriously. This is a nuclear attack submarine. It's the Type 93, I believe. It's the attack submarine version that they have out. That is probably on the order of the Los Angeles class, perhaps. But this is an area that the Chinese are behind in. Comparing this to a Virginia class or a Seawolf class is not a comparison that could be made. That doesn't mean they're not dangerous. A good sub driver with a Los Angeles class sub is a dangerous foe to have. And so I wouldn't count this out. I'm just saying that it is not as effective and 2 generations behind what the United States has. That doesn't mean it's not capable of slipping inside the ring and causing havoc. We have to be very careful of that. And the United States needs to build aircraft for the carrier on the order of the S-3A, like we used to have, and we don't have those anymore. But we do have the V-22 Osprey, and an SV-22 Osprey has been designed to carry long-range torpedoes that would help the United States carrier groups significantly. We also have EV 22 aircraft that could be a AEW. That's another weakness that this carrier has. It's a beautiful carrier, but it is having to depend on helicopters like that one right there to do its AEW function. They can't fly as high, they can't carry as much electronics gear, and so they need to be, even though they're there and they're decent, they cannot be compared with anything like an E-2D Super Hawkeye or this EV-22 I've been talking about. The Japanese, the Koreans, the Australians, the British, the French, the Italians, the Spanish, the Indians, all of them are really looking to get the F-35B, and for their smaller carriers, they will be looking to get the EV-22 or something like it, because that will give them much longer range and much better equipment to discriminate between missiles flying high or flying low. So the Chinese don't have that yet. You can bet they're looking for it, and you can bet they've already got Hawkeye type aircraft for their Stobar carriers. We know that is true because we've seen it. How effective it is, we don't know, but it certainly is going to be more effective than that helicopter option that they have. So, having said all of that, this is the most modern carrier strike group that the Chinese have, and it's probably, I would say, third best in the world. United States carrier strike groups with the large nuclear carriers are out in front of them, hands down. The French nuclear carrier group with its new destroyers is maybe not as hands down as the United States, because their two destroyers only carry 48 missiles, and that's a significant problem for both them and the French. The United States is going to have 3 destroyers, 2 cruisers, and a couple of frigates. We're going to update their carrier group here later and get the latest and greatest with the up-armed Freedom class mixed in with 3 Arleigh class 96 missiles each and 2 Ticonderoga class 130 missiles each. So the United States is carrying on the order of 700 missiles with its carrier strike group. And if you have an attack force that comes at you with 30 or 40 planes and 120 missiles, if all you have is 248 missile carriers, you're already in deep trouble if they get close enough to you to launch. And with a helicopter being your option to look for those aircraft and their missiles, you're in doubly deep trouble. The United States doesn't have that problem, and so I would expect in any wartime scenario we're going to have Aegis destroyers and maybe a cruiser helping out the British, and they're going to need it, and they better have a US carrier with a E-2D on it to help them even more. I expect that the Chinese are working on something more than that helicopter for their AEW function as well. So there you have it, 1/350th scale. You know, you're looking at 7 very good vessels to protect that very good carrier. I thank you for looking. Have as many people as you can join up with our channel. We're having some good discussions, and there are good discussions to be had. There's a naval arms race going on in the Western Pacific, and what the Koreans and the Japanese just did with their Izumo class, the Japanese, and with the Dokdo class and the Koreans, is add 4 more carriers with some very strong aircraft. The United States with the America class, the America and the Triple E, and with a couple of Wasp class, each of which can be outfitted to carry 24 F-35Bs, has added 4 more carriers. And so that's difficult for the Chinese to keep up with, because in addition to the larger carriers the United States is building in the Ford class, those smaller carriers can be built rather quickly. The Japanese can build an Izumo or a little larger class carrier in 2 years and have it in the water and have 5th generation fighters on it if they feel they need it. And if the Chinese continue to build carriers, I can almost guarantee you that both Korea and Japan will build more carriers themselves. So we'll see what the future brings. Hopefully, we can all pray to God that there's not the outbreak of a war, because these are powerful, powerful groups. And both of our countries want our young men living, having families, and raising them in a free and a safe world. And the Japanese want that, the Koreans want that, the Chinese people certainly want that. And they want their economic boom to continue so that they can live in freedom and peace. They're building ships that are capable, and they want to defend their sea lanes and lines of communication. And hopefully, my greatest hope is that something will occur that allows the Chinese to go to a multi-political system so that their people are freer, and any chance of war between us and them is much lessened as a result of that, of the freedom of their people and their happiness. So this is Jeff Head on the Jeff Head channel. You guys have a great rest of the weekend. Good night.